Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Live, the online learning community for student affairs educators. I am your host, Heather Shea. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm thrilled to be back broadcasting live from the campus of Michigan State University, where I serve as the Director of Women's Student Services in the Division of Student Affairs. On today's live broadcast, we are discussing the Ombuds office, and how we in student affairs can partner with folks who work in the Ombuds offices for the overall benefit of students. This episode of Student Affairs Live is a part of the Higher Ed Live network. All of our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be a part of our discussion today by tweeting at the hashtag Higher Ed Live. And thank you again to my amazing graduate assistant, Gabby Walla, who is tweeting alongside and monitoring today's back channel. If you have questions for any of our panelists, you can send a tweet and we will do our best to incorporate them into today's discussion. Today's live broadcast is powered by Platform Q, Education's conduit online engagement platform. And we are using enrollment using platformq.edu.com. All of our episodes are recorded. They're free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or you can take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Higher Ed Live is produced by Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. All right, now on with today's show. So today we are talking about an important and unique and yet often misunderstood position on college and university campuses. Ombudspersons have been referred to as the conscience of the university and work with their campus communities to resolve conflict through identifying systemic issues and trends while focusing on fair treatment. These campus officials are also important partners with student affairs, and I'm thrilled to be joined by three people who serve as University Ombuds today. So let's meet our panelists. Dr. Shannon Burton is the Ombudsperson here at Michigan State University, and it was over coffee in my new role as Director of Women's Student Services that this episode came to be. Thanks so much for joining us and for pitching this topic today, Shannon. Also joining us are Dr. D.A. Graham, the Ombudsperson at the University of Kansas, and Dr. Jennifer Schneider, the Student Ombuds at the University of South Florida. Welcome to all of you. Before we get to more personal introductions, let's begin by defining what we mean by an ombuds. Shannon, can you give us a broad overview? What is the etymology of this rather odd word? What is an ombuds? Where did the concept come from? And what is the history of this office in higher ed?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Heather. The term ombudsman is actually a Swedish term, and it's there where the concept initially began in the 1700s. The term means representative, and in those early years, it was an individual charged with addressing malfeasance and misconduct of government officials. From Sweden, the concept migrated to other parts of Scandinavia and to the United States in the early 1900s. In the earliest of the 1900s, there were some attempts to create ombuds offices in different branches of government here in the States, but the concept didn't really catch on here until the 1960s. Some of these earlier ombuds offices in the Scandinavian countries were what we call classical ombuds. So true to U.S. ingenuity, because we always have to do our own thing, we established a new branch of ombuds work in our colleges and universities defined as organizational ombuds. And while classical ombuds, advocate ombuds, another kind of branch of the ombuds tree, and organizational ombuds are all rooted in the same history, our standards of practice differ slightly given our particular contexts. So that begs the question, how did ombuds emerge on our campuses? As some might know, there were a lot of changes happening at our colleges and universities in the 60s. We had campus unrest, the civil rights movement, the changing relationship between students and universities, and the move towards the concept of multiversity. However, the real event that began the ombuds movement, if you will, was the Dixon versus the Alabama State Board of Education decision, whereby it was determined students could not be expelled without due process. While the decision established the need for due process for our students, many institutions needed a precipitating event to start acting on this decision. And so I think for each one of us here talking today, that precipitating event is a little bit different. For instance, at Michigan State University, which is the longest continuing continuously operating Ombuds office at any college or university in the country. That precipitating event was a lawsuit filed by a graduate student against the university, claiming that the university had violated his right to free speech. The decision for that case cited Dixon, and the university developed what was called the Academic Freedom Report in response, which outlined student rights as well as the Ombuds' role as the guardian of these rights. Many other institutions began to follow suit, and many even expanded the role to include due process for faculty and staff.
Super interesting. I didn't realize that about MSU's founding, so that's super interesting. I think what's interesting is how each of you became this role. So could we talk a little bit about your pathway to becoming your university's ombudsperson? What's your background, and why did you seek out this role? DA, why don't we start with you? Thank you for being here today.
No, thank you, Heather, for the opportunity. This is really cool. For me, I didn't seek out this role, and let me start by saying my pronouns are he, him, his. So this role actually was sort of like Plymouth Rock. It landed on me. I was coming out of the Navy as a Navy chaplain in 2005 and looking for my next opportunity. And as Shannon alluded to, a lot of the Ombuds offices, especially in California, were started by chaplains. And so it was kind of fitting that San Diego State was my first opportunity to be a student ombuds. And I appreciate them giving me that chance to prove myself. So that was in 2005, 2006. Then later I moved on to Princeton University as the University Ombuds there, and then left higher ed, not really, but started my own consulting work, doing Ombuds work. And I also, after that, was hired to be the Human Resources Director at the University of the Sciences, did that for about 4 years. And then I was the Vice President for Global Integrity for Nielsen. And then landed here in Kansas. A tornado dropped me here. So as you can see, it's a I've had various opportunities that have built on my expertise and education to do this work.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Jennifer, tell us a little bit about how you became the Ombuds at South Florida.
Yeah, you'll learn that there's no real direct path. I actually came into higher ed late. I spent 13 years in the K-12 system before I even pursued. I was doing teaching some courses as an adjunct instructor, and really sort of got turned on to higher education and administration through there. So I started out in higher ed in some academic advising positions and career services. And in one of those, while I was working at the University of Central Florida, I became friends with, met the Ombuds there, and really became fascinated with the work and the idea of an office like this. And so I was at that time pursuing a PhD in higher education here at the University of South Florida. And two of my committee members were senior level administrators at the institution at that time. And so I started sort of putting a bug in their ear about the Ombuds office and what a great resource it is. I mean, we have about 50,000 students at USF, and so really seemed like it would be a valuable resource for our students here. And it took some time, but a couple of years after I earned my PhD, I was forwarded the job description. I think our accrediting body suggested that that USF open an independent Ombuds office to address concerns of students. And so we were able to, I was able to apply for it that way. So yeah, varied paths for sure.
Great. I think we were having some initial complicated technology issues. So hopefully people are now joining us. I'm seeing audience now working. Are you all seeing that as well? Yes. Okay. I think there was some problems on the LP side, which I don't know exactly what that means, but we're working through it. So thank you to all of you who are hopefully now joining us to Student Affairs Live today. We're talking about the position of the Ombuds on campus, and interesting hearing everybody's pathways. Shannon, do you want to tell us a little bit about yours?
Sure, absolutely. Again, my name is Shannon Burton, and I'm the Ombuds at Michigan State University. I use she, her, hers pronouns. My path to becoming an Ombuds, somewhat like DA and Jennifer, it's somewhat circuitous, right? This was not a role I entered graduate school thinking I would do after graduation. That said, I've had experiences in many different places within higher ed and student affairs, from working with international students, fraternity and sorority life, to student veterans. I was exposed to different disciplinary cultures and working with graduate and undergraduate students in academic advising. And I've taught both undergraduate and graduate courses as adjunct faculty. I also did a stint in admissions as well as the Research Integrity Office. However, for the bulk of my career, I was an academic advisor. And while I was pursuing my graduate education, I always thought that was where I was going to be. But as I was finishing my PhD in 2012, I was looking for that next great adventure. And our Ombuds office here had a posting for an assistant Ombudsperson. I was drawn to the role because of my interest in student success and social justice. I saw it as a place that could integrate these passions in a really unique way. I believe I was chosen for this role because of my knowledge of the university structure, its policies and procedures, as well as my ability to relate to and understand students.
Those are good. Those are good pathways as well, and I think I share your background at the exact same higher ed program. So it's interesting how those pathways can diverge and reconnect. So one of the things that I think I've heard from your stories is that each of you have slightly different roles on your campuses, and some of you have more specific roles with students, others have more broad roles. Can you talk specifically about how you work with divisions of student affairs or with student affairs educators, whether they're in the division or not, on your respective campuses? Jennifer, let's start with you.
Sure. So I work specifically with students. That's my, those are my constituents. And so I do work closely with student affairs administrators, specifically in areas where students bring concerns, for example, housing and our conduct office. And there are sometimes concerns that emerge from some of those areas. Many of them are just administrative, just a misunderstanding about process, or wanting to clarify process or reasons for concerns. And so certainly work one-on-one with them. I report to our vice president for student success. So at the University of South Florida, we don't have an explicit student affairs division. What used to be student affairs is in a unit, shares a unit with undergraduate studies and with our enrollment management units. And so we all report to the same vice president. And so I'm also in meetings with a lot of these people. These are my peers. And so that too has led to just more of a informal relationship where they will sometimes come in and want to talk through organizational change or talk through issues surrounding just our organization here at USF. And we just got a new president. So things that are happening, positive and the challenging aspects of the work. And so certainly have a lot of friends in the unit and am able to work and collaborate with them on different initiatives.
Shannon and I are both at MSU, so we know the Division of Student Affairs is created and housed differently on every campus. Shannon, how have you worked most closely with student affairs educators or with the division?
Yeah, sure. So I think my lens is a little different because I report to the president of the university. And so like Jennifer, working through all of the changes that having a new president at an institution brings. But as for partnering with student affairs, much of that work is done in an advisory capacity. The focus of our work is the fair treatment of students, and that's the lens that our office brings to any discussion that we have with student affairs. Currently, I sit ex officio with voice and no vote on committees related to student affairs. So this includes the University Committee on Student Affairs, a work group looking at fraternity and sorority life, the Relationship Violence and Sexual Misconduct Expert Advisory Group, as well as the Dean of Students Advisory Board. We also have some other ex officio capacities throughout the institution, one of which is the All University Traffic and Transportation Committee, not student affairs related, but that's the one that I always find is unique to our history. And we also partner with our student government in presentations talking about student rights, as well as multiple units across campus in helping not just students, but faculty and staff to develop their skills related to conflict resolution.
Transportation include parking, I think.
Yes.
Is that part of it? Yes.
Yes.
The perennial issue on every campus. DA, tell us a little bit about your role with student affairs.
Yeah, here at KU, we don't call it parking, we call hunting. That's what we call it. It's always hard to find a parking space. So our role here at the university, we are considered University Ombuds, and so we handle faculty, staff, and student concerns, graduate and undergraduate. So we work with a lot of partners in student affairs to help students resolve concerns around grades. And so one of our new partners here at KU's particular office called Jayhawk SOS. And so this office is basically set up to handle anything that students are wrestling with, from grade appeals to financial problems to housing or anything in the, I'm going to use an old term, the bursar's office. I just aged myself. And so it's an opportunity for us to partner with those folks because their role is to help students around any of those issues. And usually if they can't resolve those issues where it is beyond their scope, then our office tends to take that issue up. If the student has done, let's say, a grade appeal that's gone to the highest level in the school that the student is attending, then our office gets involved when the student says that they haven't been given a fair process. And so usually the Jayhawk SOS folks will, we will work with them to try to see what we can do to help support the student, or else to be able to raise the question to folks around whether or not, the student has been treated fairly.
Okay. What is a typical day in the life of an ombud? I think anybody could answer this question. But Jennifer, I know you have some interesting experiences on your campus with how students have figured out what an ombuds does. But let's begin with first, what does a typical day look like, if there is one?
Yeah, I would say there's not a typical day. Literally never know what's coming in the door. So I have cases. I have a full-time administrative assistant who sort of manages my calendar. I think I said this, but I'm one ombuds for 50,000 students. And so I stay pretty busy. So we normally schedule 1 hour appointments, one-on-one with students. And on my calendar, there's just a case number. So I usually don't know what's coming in and what they're going to bring. And so that makes life interesting. As Shannon sort of alluded to, I also spend a lot of time in meetings, and part of that is positive. I've been here in this role for almost 5 years now, and so sit on a lot of committees as a non-voting member, as ombuds, to try to maintain that sense of neutrality and independence. I don't vote on these committees, but I sit on the Ethics and Integrity Council. That's a presidential advisory council. I sit on our Persistence Committee, which is a sort of multidisciplinary approach to our to trying to make sure that our students are successful and that they persist and that they graduate in 4 years or 6 years at the most. And I sit on the Graduate Professional Student Success Council. So there are lots of meetings, and it's nice to be invited to those and to sit at those tables and to offer perspective and to listen to changes that are happening, because they seem to be happening frequently, and some of them are really significant and are going to affect the students who end up coming to visit my office. But that certainly takes up a lot of time too. And so it's usually just a combination between one-on-one meetings with students and being on the phone and meeting with administrators and decision makers to try to help students resolve issues. So yeah, never a dull moment for sure. To the second part of your question, my students, actually, I think we're going to try to tweet it. My students, I had a grad assistant last year from our college student affairs program, master's program here at USF, Angelica, if she sees this at any point, shout out to Angelica. She and an undergraduate student who was helping us in the office created a video because we were really trying to figure out what students do think about our office and what an ombuds is. And we learned that most of them don't know. And I think even the students who come here sometimes don't know. Someone said, oh, you should go see the ombuds. They'll come in and say, I'm here to see the and they don't really even know how to say it or why they're here or what we do. They just know that somebody said, you should go talk to her. And so, yeah, lots of misrepresentations. I would say a lot of them hope that I'll be their attorney, that I'll represent them, that I'll take on the university on their behalf, and then they'll get their way. Others, I think, have a good experience here. We're able to help them resolve some issues, and then they want to keep coming back. Like there's maybe more as a counselor, or I have 2 college-age students myself and a middle schooler, so I'm sure the maternal vibe, we could do a whole nother webcast on how our identities shape the work that we do, but I'm quite certain that I give off a maternal vibe, and sometimes they'll come and just want to talk things through about homework, and I, with 50,000 students, we have to sort of mitigate that and provide them with better alternative resources on campus that might be able to provide that kind of ongoing support. But yeah, very interesting work, and never a dull moment, never a boring day.
Yeah, I think Gabby just grabbed that link off of our show notes. So if folks are watching live, you can find it. We'll also try to add it to the live or to the website for this episode, so folks can watch. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, all the language on college and university campuses is a little bit obtuse, right? So you mentioned bursar and registrar and provost, and it's like you need a secret decoder ring sometimes to figure out what is exactly the best person to talk to about any of the issues I'm facing.
Well,
but what I love about
I think many times ombuds are a sort of a last resort, like when visitors have been shuffled around an organization and they've tried to be heard in other places. And so when they finally get here, they're not sure what I could possibly do that anybody else hasn't done yet. But I think that's probably the same even for faculty and staff.
Yeah, Shannon, I know, I'm sure colleagues even at Michigan State University don't exactly understand what ombuds offices do. I knew already what you did because I have worked really closely with ombuds at previous institutions, but I'm curious, what do other colleagues at MSU assume your role is?
Yeah, so I think that's funny because when I stepped into the role, even I had misconceptions about it, right? I often referred to my work in my early years as high conflict academic advising. However, it's really much more than that, right? This is, as Jennifer's alluded to, a space where individuals can come and truly be heard when they feel like they've not been listened to in any other part of the institution. And I think part of that, too, is that systemic piece, because we're looking for those trends. We're looking for those patterns where fair treatment and equity were not being attended to in the way that they should have been attended to. So a lot of times my colleagues have said, why do you want to sit and listen to complaints all day long? And I want to reframe that, because it's really not listening to complaints all day long. It's really attending to the humanity, compassion, and empathy that's in our institutions. And this is often the only space where students find that when we're working at such a large institution. And I think Jennifer also alluded to this. I think one of the other big misconceptions of our roles is that we have formal decision-making authority. That's not the case. We are an informal office, and we are neutral. I think individuals are often surprised when we don't fix a problem for them. So our role is really to present them with some options, not to encourage or discourage anyone from doing anything, but to lay out the groundwork for them. And sometimes when we are trying to give our visitors agency, I think that they struggle because like the mom factor, I have that too, Jennifer, where they want me to come in and fix a situation for them. And that's not always the case. So I would say those are some of the misconceptions that I see and that I've dealt with here in this space.
So we've heard a little bit about the parenting piece. DA, do you want to talk a little bit about just broadly what kinds of cases in general you see? And then I want to get into more specific areas of how our work generally on campuses has become much more regulated and enforced by policy. But what are some of the cases, without, of course, addressing anything that's specifically confidential?
Well, specifically, right? So I can't go into any specific cases, but no, I appreciate the question. We deal with a lot of academic matters, grade disputes, not feeling welcomed in a classroom, gender identity issues, or any social identity issues where students don't believe that professors are honoring their accommodations. Also, some of the things around services, whether it be, like I said, accommodations or relationships in those courses, housing, harassment, financial issues, expulsion, discrimination. One of my provosts asked me one day, and he said, "What is it that the ombuds can't hear?" And I said, "Nothing." We hear it all. I've had students who have left the university and want to come back. We always hear from parents. That's the other part as well. And so having those conversations around, sometimes having to coach parents around their child's behavior or ways that they can help their student manage situations that are happening. So there's a myriad of things. Anything that happened with young people usually lands in our office in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, I know your role also extends to faculty and staff as well. So can you talk a little bit about some of the cases that might involve faculty and specifically staff?
Yeah, so some of the things that, some of the ways that we engage, if students believe that they are being, targeted for plagiarism, right? Or it's unfair that a faculty member believes that they've been cheating. They don't believe that they've cheated, or that there are some special circumstances for what happened in that course. Sometimes you will have, harassment, abuse of students. So there was a particular case I know at UMKC that made the papers where graduate students were being abused by and misused by their PI, the primary investigator. And so students come forward with housing concerns and how they're treated, by the staff. I've even had students who walked out of a class and said that we don't want to go back because his faculty member is treating us in a way that is not enriching or engaging. And so we've had to help them navigate how to raise that to the levels of the folks who can do something about it. So you get a myriad of things around diversity, like I said, marginalized students coming from microaggressions to, just not feeling like that they are a part of the organization. Even when it comes to protest and dissent sometimes, students don't believe that they're being heard. This is an opportunity for us to engage faculty at the chair level, at the dean's level, and the advisors as well, right? I had a particular student who was misadvised about graduation and told that she couldn't graduate. And so she stayed at the university for another year, not here at KU, by the way. And so she stayed at the university for another year. And it was found out that the advisor misadvised her. She could have graduated the year before. And so there are a lot of things that happen around trying to resolve that issue to the satisfaction of all parties involved. And so the Ombuds gets involved and tries to be that impartial, neutral person to hear all sides and to see how we can move this student forward and also help the institution have better processes and policies.
Are there personnel matters that come to your desks related to staff and faculty, or mediation between staff and supervisors, or those types of roles, or is that primarily an HR, end up becoming an HR issue?
No, we definitely see staff concerns, relationships, evaluative relationships, faculty members not getting along. There's a myriad of things around misconduct. So I always say that there's a difference between performance and conduct. And so we do a lot of facilitated conversations when folks do not have the emotional intelligence to be able to handle conflict within their departments. We know in graduate schools, these are not the things that they're teaching future faculty members in ways to engage. We have chairs who sometimes don't have the skill set to manage behaviors. And so we're doing a lot of coaching, consultations, trainings. As a matter of fact, here at KU, we are all working to help change how we engage each other through the concept of compassionate communication. It's also called nonviolent communication. And so we've trained probably now over 2,000 faculty, staff, and students on this language because we want to change the culture of how we're engaging each other. And so my office was given the go-ahead to work with our organizational development folks. And as the Ombuds, it's really nice to be able to have that because I have no authority or power, which I really love. And some folks would say that the Ombuds, does have power, and our power is through our level of influence, right? Being able to have a level of integrity that when we do raise a concern, that folks will hear us. And it's important that we recognize that we have that opportunity to help change policy by raising those concerns and being able to help students understand that it is not a us against them situation, although it may feel that way.
So I know there's times in any position where your personal values might conflict with your role. Jennifer, do you have a story, or can you share about a time when you faced this kind of conflict? And it might relate to policy as well, but I'm curious about that.
I was thinking about this when we were writing these questions. I think for all of us, probably a time when our work sort of challenges our values is when we're called to be neutral, when something really feels inequitable, or when something really sort of challenges our values as individuals, and having to figure out how to set those aside and stay neutral is really challenging. And there are lots of Ombuds conversations. DA can speak to this because he was in an exchange recently about our ability as humans to really be neutral. But I did have recently had an experience, and I'll have to sort of keep it as general as possible, but we had a grad student here who was an international woman studying here, and came to talk through some issues with a faculty member with whom she was working. And boy, it didn't sit well with me, right? And so as my Western values as a woman in the United States really it frustrated me, the things that she was saying, and it worried me. And I knew that the university would want to know that this was happening. But she begged for confidentiality, and she kept saying things like, this isn't my place. I need to be, she used the term submissive. I'm the student. That person's the faculty member. Please don't tell anyone. I don't want to report it. And we promised confidentiality, right? So what do I do with that? So I actually ended up being able to get around it. And I think this is a nice way that our role specifically is able to sort of get at systemic issues, if that were the case. And so I was able to work with our Office of Graduate Studies to look at this particular faculty member's history as far as time to graduation with students, and look at male students and female students, look at the men and the women, and see if there were any disparities in the progression of students based on gender. And we were able to help without identifying the student, without calling anybody out specifically, without putting that student at risk of being identified. And so the university was still able to respond appropriately, but was able to do so in a way that protected her. And so while I think we do struggle with our own values, I think that our work allows us to be creative and to be able to work with the university even when, and to be able to work around those sort of sticky, uncomfortable situations. So yeah, for me, it's the neutrality that sometimes it's hard for me to not want to take a side, especially working with students where the power differential is significant. And so we say we don't advocate, but at the same time, I sort of have to in order to get the student's voice heard. And so that whole notion of neutrality is a little gray and challenging sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Heather, can I jump in here for a second?
For sure.
So I totally agree with Jennifer on this. It's a concept that we're even wrestling with as a profession. That, you know, as human beings, how neutral can we be? The more preferred term is impartial, or as some folks would say, multi-partial, right? And I echo Jennifer's reactivity, right? When a student comes in, or a person comes in, or a visitor comes in with a concern that resonates with you, whether it be around your social identity or an experience you may have had in a previous life, it pushes you to want to move the system in a way that the system is not moving itself. And so you're having to represent yourself. And we do say we advocate for fairness and a fair process, right? That's the way we get around it. So that neutral piece though, right? And if we're going to advocate for anything, we can't be neutral. This is why I like the impartial piece, because I can be impartial and advocate for fairness and a fair process. And I think that's where Jennifer was going with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Shannon, what about you? Is that one of the ways that your values have also come up against your work in conflict?
Yeah, I think so. And I think similar to Jennifer and DA, I've managed those types of conflicts around my neutrality in similar ways, was framing it within that fair treatment. If you go back to kind of the history of the ombuds world, the precursor to our current professional association, the University and College Ombudsman Association, they had the same standards of practice, but they also had an additional tagline to that, which was, and above all else, seek justice. And so I think that's one of those things when we talk about fair treatment that we need to look back as into kind of that purpose of why these offices were originally created and what we were really look to address for our institutions and our organizations. So.
Yeah. DA, I want to jump back for a second and talk a little bit about increased regulations and federal state policies. I think what's interesting is I think for many campus administrators, their roles have really changed substantially. And I know that's ebbed and flowed over time as different people have come into office. But would you be able to talk a little bit about how the types of cases or maybe the increase in regulation has affected your work? Like I'm thinking specifically around Title IX and other issues that offices like the Dean of Students, for example, are increasingly dealing with issues related to.
Sure. Yeah. So this is one of the concerns, right? Whenever the General Counsel's office or Human Resources, at least on the employment side, gets involved, is concerned about the ombuds, right? Whether or not this neutrality piece is going to, and confidentiality, right, is going to keep things swept under the rug, right? When people raise concerns to you. So I think. So one of the things that we see and we purport on our page and in all of our documents is that we are not an office of notice. So we are not mandatory reporters in our institutions. For some of us, I know some folks are they have to be, and so that could present a problem, right? And so what we've seen, I've seen more visitors when the respondent comes forward and say, I've been accused of a Title IX violation. I don't believe that the institution has any supports for me. They have them all for the complainant. I have nowhere to go and no one to talk to. And so someone pointed you in my direction. A lot of times they have already attained attorneys, right, and different things like that in order to protect themselves. And so I think that was a part of it. If you look at the letter that came out from the Department of Education, Betsy DeVos and her folks saying that we need to be more cognizant, right, of the respondents to these particular violations as well. We need to have more systems in place, more policies that protects both the respondent and the complainant. And so, and as an ombuds, we have an opportunity to, address these concerns. One of the things for me as an ombuds, and I'm going to get out of the way here, is sometimes we're asked to mediate a situation that was a Title IX issue, right? We're asked to mediate if both parties are willing to do that. And sometimes it could be an uncomfortable space to find yourself. And, I'd be interested to hear how, what Shannon or Jennifer, how they, feel about those sort of things, since they deal with a lot more students than I do.
Well, I think one of the things that I was going to talk about. Oh, sorry, Heather.
Sorry. Yeah, a little bit of a delay. We keep talking over you, Shannon.
Okay. I think one of the things that kind of raises a question probably for individuals that aren't familiar with this role is, well, how can they not be mandated reporters? And so when you look at the guidance, how that guidance is worded and how we practice according to our standards of practice is not a match. So by the definitions of a responsible employee and by the definition of a campus safety authority, because we have no formal decision-making authority, we're really in that space where we have no power to act when a report is brought to us. And so that's part of the reasoning why many of us have been able to keep confidential in Title IX spaces as well, is because of those standards of practice. Like DA, I certainly see both complainants and respondents in the process for different reasons. Complainants are usually coming to me because they want to explore what the reporting process looks like before they engage with it, right? It gives some agency and some control of the process back to that complainant, when in other spaces it may have been taken away from them. For respondents, it kind of goes back to those original pieces of us attending to the due process of students as they move through our systems and our disciplinary processes. So that's kind of the piece that I would add to what DA has covered.
Excellent. Jennifer?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that's certainly the capacity in which students come to visit my office. I also had an issue where there was a Title IX case. It was adjudicated, it was over, but both students were still on campus. So the outcome there There wasn't enough evidence to suspend anybody, to remove anybody. And so the no contact order had been lifted. And so the question then was, now what? And so we had some administrators and faculty members who were making suggestions about how the students should proceed, but we have to be careful that the hearing was over, right? And so there are no more sanctions. We can't restrict access. And so I'm really working with the students, both of them, and with the administrators to be able to figure out the what next when students who are engaged in a Title IX process, when that's over, and how they move forward from there, especially in smaller programs where it's hard to just avoid each other, and working with administration there also. So yeah, my office also is, I'm not a mandated reporter. None of my staff members are mandated reporters, and we're fortunate in that. I know that there are many institutions where that's not the case, but.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I think you all have talked a lot about is neutrality, or maybe inability to be neutral. And there's other specific standards that the association, the International Ombuds Association, puts forth. And one of the other pieces that you also have spoken about is that you have the ear of highest level administrators. So balancing both those standards and of practice, as well as your ability to influence change through relationships and through connections at those tables where decisions are being made. I think that's really interesting. And in our prep call, we were talking about kind of the concept of serving at the pleasure of not being a part of the role, and also this concept of speaking truth to power. And both of those really resonate with me, or make me think a little bit about kind of how do you balance that. I don't know. We are not running super short on time, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. All of your thoughts are on how do you do that effectively. GA, do you want to start?
You had to. This is a tough one. Yeah. So the Ombuds is really seen, especially like to each other, right? Amongst each other, we're seen as these wonderful, loving people who don't want any conflict to happen. We want everything to be great. But we are people who, and I love what Shannon brought forward, is that justice, right, was a part of our mandate, right? And a lot of us still carry that. A lot of us still carry that as a part of our process, that we would like to see justice done. I don't, for me, not serving at the pleasure of, it gives me, I feel more comfortable being able to be honest with my colleagues who are in the highest levels of administration. I think the other part of that is, it's the kind of, you need to create relationships where people can be able to hear you, and not that you're always going to them when something's wrong, but you're showing up when something's right as well. And I think that allows them, for you to be able to speak that truth and to connect with them in ways that they never even imagined themselves. So that's what I found, is that we've been able to, by creating those influential relationships, speaking that truth comes across a lot easier, right? That spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the challenges of all of our jobs, is that we exist within organizational hierarchies, with centers of power and tables where decisions are made. I'm gonna move now to kind of projections of the future, and perhaps there's folks who are watching today who might be interested in this as a potential future career path. If they're sitting in a class in a graduate program. So to kind of combine and wrap up as our last question, what do you see as the future of this profession? And if people are considering this, what kinds of experiences should they be thinking about and trying to foster right now in order to prepare for that eventual future? Jennifer, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, so I think my sense is that the ombuds profession is certainly growing quickly, and we're still trying to define and standardize and clarify what it means to be an organizational ombuds. Shannon talked at the beginning about the different types of ombuds that there are, but even just within the arm of the organizational ombuds, what that looks like, I think that in the future we'll see some more sort of concrete standardization. These are things that you'll need to have. I imagine we'll see degree programs or at least certificate programs specific to this. I think to answer that for anyone who's listening, we have several student affairs professionals who have come and asked me, what can I do? What do I need to do to be an ombuds? And I think right now it's the sort of softer aspects of the work. Becoming trustworthy. Student affairs is a small community, even around the country. It's a small world, and word travels fast among the community. And so I think being known as someone who's trustworthy, because as DA suggested, that's really critical to build those relationships, and so that whenever you do make a phone call and want to talk through an issue, that nobody feels like they're getting in trouble or they don't feel defensive, but we can just work through it in a really honest, authentic way. And so being known is simply, this sounds silly, but being a good human, being easy to work with, being able to think creatively about problems. I think there are trainings certainly that an aspiring ombuds could look into. IOA has a foundations course. There's also a new webinar I think coming out with IOA that's for people who for younger. Professionally younger people who are interested in the work. Lots of resources online of just kind of learning what it means, but certainly formalized trainings. And there's a emerging ombuds network. EON that's not IOA specific, but they meet, I think, by social media, by Slack. There are lots of opportunities to start engaging. I would also say, just like with any student affairs, any functional area that you might be interested in student affairs, in the same way, I'm setting up informational interviews with ombuds and just learning how they got to where they are and asking for suggestions. But but I think primarily within your organization now, be the good human, right? Be the trustworthy person who can listen without thinking about how they're going to respond, and who can work with just about everybody on campus and problem solve creatively.
Great. Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on kind of the future of the profession as well as pathways for folks who might be interested?
You mean Shannon?
Oh, sorry. I meant Shannon. Did I say Jennifer?
It's fine.
Sorry.
So I think one of the things that we're saying, as like with the social movements of the 1960s that originally established the role here in the United States, there's a resurgence kind of an interest of the role in response to the Me Too movement. Again, one of the major reasons for this is the informality and confidentiality of our offices, which gives agency back to complainants. But when we're seeing this expansion, one of the spaces we're seeing this expansion right now is in the professional research associations, and specifically to address issues related to harassment and discrimination, but even expanding to address the more professional codes of conduct within the different disciplines that higher education is associated with. I had the pleasure to serve as one of the co-ombuds for the American Educational Research Association this last year. So that was taking my skills and applying it in a slightly different organizational context, but still attending to those standards of practice. I also often, as we're talking to individuals that are thinking about maybe entering this space, I often talk about my work as being on an axis, right? The horizontal axis being that of dealing with the relational and power dynamics between individuals, as well as those conflict resolution skills and strategies. And then I talk about the vertical axis being the kind of understanding of the system and the processes and procedures of the institution. And so I think ombuds kind of need to have skill sets in both places in terms of understanding kind of how we see the humanity in one another, but also how we understand the bureaucracy and how we can help other individuals navigate that.
Awesome. DA, thoughts on the future?
Well, this is a very good question. I think for us as a profession, we're going to have to go the way of, I believe, psychology when they created the DSM. Right. We need to have standardized ways of, if we all see a patient, a visitor who is exhibiting particular, not symptoms, but presenting different indicators, then if we're all looking at it, we all can't come up with different ways of prescribing to deal with that. So if, that, and that's what happened in psychology. So they had to, come up with the DSM in order to help psychologists have a standard or guide. And I think we need that going forward. I would encourage folks who want to do this work, I will echo my colleagues, be the person that is approachable, that is people consider genuine, that people consider that has integrity and different things like that, but also being able to read the tea leaves of the institution or an organization. And I think that'll be helpful.
All right, final thoughts in one sentence. Any recommendations or advice for working with your campus's ombuds? Dee, I'm going to start with you.
I'm just going to go to my tagline. It's better to know us and not need us than to need us and not know us. So feel free to reach out, investigate, see who we are, what we do. And as a matter of fact, we're here and available for all.
Awesome. Perfect. Shannon.
I think kind of similar, reach out to your ombuds office and get to know how they function at your institution and lean on them as a resource to understand the institution from a new lens. They can give you perspective to issues and may be able to highlight systemic concerns they have seen for your area of which you were not aware.
Awesome. Awesome. Jennifer, not Shannon.
I appreciate when organizations provide space to really know what people are saying about them. And so I would encourage student affairs professionals specifically to just embrace the work we're trying to do. It's not always doom and gloom. It's a really positive opportunity to make real impactful systematic changes in our organizations.
Excellent. Well, I for sure learned a lot about your RL's role today, and I really appreciate your time here on Student Affairs Live. Thank you to the three of you as panelists. Great work of our producers behind the scenes who addressed some technology issues as we were getting rolling today. And thanks as always to Gabby Walla, my graduate assistant, who managed our back channel and even inserted some pretty fun hashtags like Mary Poppins analogy after the spoonful of sugar comment, which is great. For those of you who watch regularly, Student Affairs Live will be off the air during the month of December, but we'll be back in January. We are currently seeking a selection of topics. Keith Edwards, Tony Duty, and I usually host about one episode a month, so please email us or send us a tweet if you have ideas. You can receive reminders about all of our future episodes as we get those underway by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter or browsing our archives at higheredlive.com. Again, I'm Heather Shea. Thanks again to everyone who contributed to today's episode, and particularly to my fabulous guests. And thanks to everyone who is watching. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.